Welcome to Eternal Beasts, and today we're going to be looking at skinning out a rabbit's feet. Rabbits have weird feet, and this is why I'm treating them as a separate issue. You can see that big heel bone in this x-ray of a rabbit's foot. This is what makes it a little more challenging to skin out rabbit feet. This is a diagram of what a rabbit hindfoot looks like. We'll be taking out all the bones right down to this last joint and the claw. This one's been skinned, it still has all the bones in its feet, and we don't want that. Traditionally, you're taught to have an initial incision along the sole of the foot. I actually prefer to do my initial incision along the side of the foot. You'll see the underneath of a rabbit's foot is very densely furred. It doesn't have a foot pad per se, it has this thick fur. That actually creates a very noticeable incision, so I prefer to skin at that junction. Mainly because a lot of my rabbits tend to be in strange positions where you can see the underside of their feet. So if I skin at this actual junction, or rather inside at this actual junction, I don't end up with a line of cut fur on the sole of the foot, and you can actually hide this incision quite cleanly. So yeah, again, the initial incision is just straight along that separation line between the thick sole foot under fur and the top fur of the foot. I will start right at the hock, up near the ankle, and I'll go straight along that side until I get to just where the toe on the side of the foot starts. So you can see it's a very long incision, and it's rabbit's feet, hind feet are very bony. There's very little flesh in them at all, so it's actually quite easy to skin along them. One thing you will notice though when you are skinning is there is a very big difference between the thickness of the skin on the underside of the foot where that dense fur is and the thickness of the skin on top of it. I'm talking like a millimeter's difference, so it's quite noticeable. Skinning the underfoot, the skin is also quite adhered to where the bones are, so rather than just aiming for skinning the fascia, that joining connective tissue, you're actually more running your scalpel along the bone. That way you don't run the risk of punching a million holes in your little rabbit's foot, because trust me, you don't want to be sewing up a million little holes. Now, this rabbit, of course, has been skinned, and I've cut the feet off at the ankle, so there's a little bit of the tibia and fibia attached to this ankle. So what I'm going to do now is just extend my incision up a little bit into the ankle so that I can pop that ankle bone through the hole that I've made. This is going to make it much easier to get the skin off the feet. So rather than trying to skin a foot like we skinned the body of a rabbit, we're going to not try and go all the way around. We're going to try and get enough space in that incision to actually poke that little bit of tib and fib out, and that's what I've just done. You saw very briefly there a little bit of a twang of a tendon. That is the very strong tendon that connects to the actual heel bone, and the heel bone is hidden, which makes it really, again, quite challenging when you get to this part, because you can't just skin straight down, like you can't tube skin. You can see that round bulge that's just underneath my left thumb. That is actually the heel bone. So we've got to actually skin deep enough into that heel bone and that tendon, which is just being exposed now, so that we can pop the heel bone out through the incision that we've made. So again, we're aiming at skinning on the bone, and here it comes. The heel bone will be getting exposed right here. Again, use tension in the fur as that end of that thick joint. I'm sorry if there's a crash in the background. That's my cat. I'm not editing it out. And you can see there the heel bone has popped out now, and we're now just able to skin straight along the underside of the foot. Again, making sure you keep your scalpel more on the bone than on the skin, because even though that tougher skin of the bottom of the foot is thicker, it's still very easy to cut through, because there's really no connecting tissue, none of that fascia that you can skin through. So again, just skinning very carefully along the bottom of the foot, you'll see a whole bunch of tendons coming up where the toes all join on. Don't be too concerned now about getting them off the skin. You can go back and remove them later. This is really about getting the bones out of the foot. And the reason why we don't leave bones in is because I'm not dry preserving this. I'm actually going to be tanning. If you leave bones in, all of that tissue that's there, even though there's not so much, will shrink. So you'll end up with little shriveled feet, even though they're fluffy feet. And it really won't give you as professional a result or as good a result. So I always skin out the bones of my rabbit's feet. Like I said, we're skinning all the way down to the foot to the very last bit of bone that the claw joins onto. So we will be leaving the very tip bit of the bone and the claw. The reason why I leave the final bone, like the final metatarsal in, is because the claw is actually quite attached to it. I have found that even taking out that last bone, I've had claws fall out. They don't seem to adhere, particularly in rabbits, well to the skin just by themselves. So I find that by leaving in that very last little bit of bone with the claw attached means that you're going to end up with a rabbit with all these claws. If that's not concerning you, you can skin everything out and take out the claws as well, but I like to have the claws in there. I think it actually gives the foot better definition. And here you can see I've now done the entire foot and ankle, and I'm getting down to that first knuckle on the feet. So I've got that first knuckle exposed now. Rabbit's hind feet only have 4 toes, if you can recall from that diagram. I'm turning this backwards and forwards and skinning just a little bit from the top and a little bit from the bottom each time, just to free up all of those tendons. You can apply a fair bit of pressure here, and sorry, I go out of frame a bit. But again, just make sure that you're not too much, because you do want to actually not pull its foot out and potentially rip the foot off and tear your skin, because that's just something else you're going to have to sew up later. So there you can see I've got the first bend in the ankle, and I'm down to the second joint now. And you can see the tiny little toe joint right there. Now what I'm doing with my scalpel there is I'm actually not trying to cut through it, and I eventually do get scissors. Again, I'm not cutting that joint. What I'm doing with my scissors is I'm twisting it, and I'm actually twisting it to dislocate the toe joint. So there you can see the end is very clean and smooth. It's just popped that joint out. I could probably do this with pliers as well, but I had scissors on my desk and I'm lazy. So what I ended up doing was going back and dislocating all those toes. If there's any tendons left, I will actually snip those. Dislocating them as opposed to just cutting through the bone, you're not having shards of bone left in the pelt that could potentially make holes as well. Once you get the 2 outside feet, the 2 outside toes dislocated at the joint, you can then extend your skinning along the 2 inside toes, because they are a bit longer. So I just find it easier to do the outside ones first, skin a little bit further down the inside toes, and then do the inside toes. So that's what I've done here. Again, ruining my scissors by actually getting into the joint and twisting them to actually dislocate that joint. Like I said, I'm not cutting through the bone. I'm literally just popping that joint out, and yes, destroying my scissors in the process. So mental note to self, use pliers for this rather than scissors. And there's the finished foot. So you can see that in the hind feet, I have 1 single incision along the side of the foot. I've got 1 little bone left in the toe with the toenail attached, and I have 4 nice clean little toes pointing up, and that's the top of the foot. So you can see his 4 little toes and the foot that I've taken out beside it. To flip it over, that's what the bottom of the foot looks like, and there you can see I have no visible incision on the bottom of it. He has 4 nicely defined toes. Front feet can be done at the same time as you're doing the leg. Rabbits have 5 toes on their front feet, so you'll see that little thumb is right up the top near the ankle, and we will again be skinning all the way down to that last digit and leaving in the claw. But that 5th toe, the little thumb, does present some challenges. I'm now turning his little tube skinned leg out. Like I said, you can actually do this at the same time that you're skinning out the body because he was quite damaged. I actually cut all his feet off, but this could actually be done in the initial process. The hind feet I would always do separately. So again, we've now exposed part of the wrist joint. I actually did cut this off at the wrist, so I don't really have a radius and ulnar much there to grab onto. I'm using pliers to apply quite a bit of force to expose more of that bone that I can skin off. Now the front feet have more fat on them than the hind feet, particularly under the foot pad. So that's just something to be aware of. But of course the main thing is this little thumb is right where that wrist bone is. So if you remember from the diagram, we are being very, very careful of keeping an eye out for that thumb. And you see this little black spot? That is the thumbnail. So I am right on the wrist there and the thumb is already there. Now if we miss that and skin that completely down, the thumbnail is going to fall off because we'll keep the entire thumb and the nail as part of the foot that we've actually taken off. And we don't want that to happen. I actually want him to have a thumb. So what we'll have to do is expose that bone that the thumb is attached to, which, as I said, is right up at the bend of the wrist. So if you bend your wrist forward, you can see where your thumb attaches. Well, it's really, really noticeable on a rabbit. So I have to actually separate that digit right out at the wrist. So I'm not skinning all the way down the foot just for the thumb. I'm actually getting that little bone out initially. This is probably the trickiest thing about front feet, is making sure you can get that. And this is, there's no pretty way to do it because it is such a tiny little joint. I am literally just cutting through it here with my scalpel. As I mentioned before, you will definitely blunt a scalpel doing feet because there's not a lot of fascia. As I said before, you are cutting directly onto bone so that you don't ruin the pelt. So again, just pushing it into the table with my right hand and pulling with it. Now you can actually see that tendon for the thumb there. That is what I'm actually going to separate out. So I've cut it off at the joint and I need to make sure that that whole thumb bone, that's really technical, is loose so that I can actually keep it intact. So there's a little bit of teasing away here of the flesh to make sure that I can separate out that little digit, and there it pops. I've gone through the actual the joint and the thumb is now exposed. So you need to cut down to make sure that you've actually got that as a completely separate joint. So I'm actually cutting with quite a bit of force onto the rest of the foot so that I'm sure that the foot is now separated from the thumb bone, and the thumb will actually come out on the pelt and not on the bones that are left behind. So again, the remaining 4 toes are managed exactly like the hind foot. Expose that little joint, use my long-suffering scissors to twist the joint and dislocate the joint so that I can actually just cut through the tendon. That way, again, I don't have any exposed bone. I've only got the clean joint. It's very easy to do on 4 paws because their bones are quite soft. And there you have it. I have 4 little toes and 1 thumb completely attached to the pelt. I'll quickly turn it inside out. This is where having a pair of long tweezers is actually helpful because rabbits have really long front legs. So if you poke a long pair of tweezers down, you can actually grab the toes and just pull it the correct way in. A bit like turning a sock in the right way again. So a little bit of teasing and I'll get his toes out the correct way again. And then you can see his little foot complete with thumb. So that's the top of the foot. The thumb is almost invisible and you think, why bother? Well, I know, and the rabbit knows that he now has thumbs. I like having a rabbit with 4 toes and on its hind feet and all its nails and having 4 toes and a thumb on its front feet. So that is really all you need to do. Of course, it's got 2 hind legs and 2 front legs, so I do thoroughly recommend that you repeat the process on the other side as well. If you have any questions or queries, please leave a comment or a question at the end of the video, and I will do my very best to get back to you on all of them. I will be doing another video on skinning out the head, but also there is another video coming up on how to turn ears and how to turn the eyelids and the lips so you get a nice clean finish. Thank you again for coming along, and I'll just randomly talk here until the audio runs out. It's been grand. Bye.